Welcome to Baby Boomer Tales. My name is Jim. You can find us at babyboomertales.com. Once you've arrived at our webpage, there are links to our YouTube channel, Apple Podcasts, our Facebook page, Boomer's General Store. You can contact us at babyboomertales@gmail.com. How are you doing today? I just got finished trimming up a cedar tree over on our east fence line. The tree is very, very huge. It's just really big. And I always had it where it went to the ground. I know the dogs used to lay in there on hot summer days, but it was a pain to mow around, especially on the other side of the fence line. I would try to mow that down every fall before winter came. It used to be the farmer that owns that field would mow it, but the old man, Martin, he's gone now, and his son doesn't do that. So I take it upon myself to mow it, and you have to mow around that and actually get into the farm field, and I always would do it after he harvested his crop in the fall. But I decided a couple years ago to start trimming it up where you could walk and mow under it. Well, we did our side of the property line last year, and this year I decided to do the other side so it'd be all trimmed up and I could get under there in the fall. And it was a major job. Poison ivy everywhere, all these weird vines growing up through it. There's a tree growing up through it also, a deciduous tree. I was going to cut that down this year, but I've decided to wait until next year because it went right up through it and there are branches going through the tree that if I cut it down, it wouldn't fall. So then that could get quite dangerous, and it's above my pay grade, and I've got to figure out how to do it. I'm not going to hire somebody to come cut that tree down. I'm going to do it myself. But I decided after all that work, getting that stuff out of there, I would just wait till next year on that one. Well, I mowed that east side of the fence line yesterday, thinking maybe I could mow it down 2 or 3 times during the year so it's not taller than me. Literally, there are places in that is taller than me. I used to mow it with my tractor, but I've started mowing it with my lawnmower now. Now my lawnmower is a 0-turn radius, 60-inch cut rider. It does a wonderful job. It's quite the lawnmower. And it does handle that in the fall. It wouldn't handle it this time of year if it was taller than me. So we'll just have to see. It's quite a job, and I'm always about worn out by the time I get all that done. But I mowed about 5 acres anyway yesterday. You know, my wife's yard is about 8 acres. That's quite a yard. We could have a little golf course here. You know, a couple holes anyway. If I still play golf, maybe I would do that. When we first bought this property, I used to go out and hit golf balls, and I could retrieve them. But I've given that up. You mow for 5 hours out there, and the last thing you want to do is go play 18 holes of golf afterwards. So golf is in my rearview mirror, and that's okay. If I lived in town, I would still play golf though. One of my best friends, he loves golf, but I'm an ex-golfer. Me and Jack Nicklaus. You're right. Have you ever wondered if you had turned to the right, for example, instead of the left, or instead of going straight, or turn to the left instead of the right, what your life would be like? How different it would be. Life is all about choices. One choice you make, if it's right or wrong, or just a neutral choice, you could have gone either way and nothing important at the time would have happened. But the ramifications of that one simple decision could change your course of your life. Change history, possibly. Not that what we do on an everyday basis has any historical significance whatsoever, But you never know. You just never know. I'm reading a book right now about a guy that came over on the Mayflower and he got washed overboard, and some kind of rope wrapped around his ankle was laying on deck. He was just a passenger, shouldn't have even been on deck. And so he wasn't lost at sea, and they pulled him back aboard. Well, that guy was just some guy. He ended up being a great, etc., grandfather of George Bush. So you never know. So one act could have changed everything. If he just wouldn't have had that accident of the rope wrapping around his ankle, he'd have been gone forever. And who knows, on our history of the United States, what would have changed. So never think that because I make this one decision, it's no big deal. But you can't be frozen and I can't make a decision because it may affect generations to come either. So I've been wondering here if I would turn right instead of left, if I would have stayed home instead of going out and meeting so-and-so. What about if Lincoln wouldn't have gone to the play that night? Or if Japan wouldn't have bombed Pearl Harbor and thrown us into World War II? Basically, Europe was already fallen to Germany, and we could be living in a whole different world. Just because something that we think is terrible and awful, Japan bombing us, propelled us into that war that really the Allies would not have won if that act wouldn't have happened. What if Kennedy wouldn't have gone to Dallas in 1963? What if Martin Luther King Jr. had preached hate instead of love? Completely different world today. Our song of the week is Both Sides Now, written by Joni Mitchell. The book, Henderson the Rain King, inspired Joni to write this song about clouds. She recorded Both Sides Now 3 times over her career, once on her album Clouds, once on Joni Mitchell Live at the Second Fret, 1966, and another time where instead of just the guitar, she had an orchestra. Judy Collins recorded this wonderful song in 1968, and it hit number 8 on the Billboard Hot 100 charts. That was my favorite rendition of Both Sides Now for years and years. But as I got listening to some versions by Joni, I think I like all versions of it. I like the whole idea of the song. I've looked at love from both sides now, from give and take and still somehow. Sometimes I trip out on what ifs. What if I would have went to school instead of traveling? What if I would have stayed at my dad's store instead of all the junk I went through? There is good and not so good in simple everyday choices. By traveling so much, which was really not very positive thing in my life because I was hitchhiking, getting loaded, living a bohemian lifestyle. But if I wouldn't have been traveling, I wouldn't have met this one man named Andrew who introduced me to the life of Christianity. Not that I thought it took at the time, don't get me wrong. I just did it to get rid of him so I could go get loaded. But a seed was planted in my life that later I recognized. What if I hadn't gone to that grocery store when my friend Vicky called and asked me to come over? I went over there not knowing what she wanted, and she introduced me to the girl that 47 years later has been my wife. I could have blown that one off very easily. What if I had stayed at the trading post? When I worked for Jay, it's the best job I ever had by far, and I learned everything about business I've ever known. Now, not everything I learned from experience later on, but what that store and that man taught me was invaluable, and a lot of the principles I still use today. And the reason I left is because I was young and stupid, and I saw another need in town that the trading post had no desire to try to fill, and not enough room to do it anyway. And what they did in an excellent manner. And when I left, by no means thought I was going into competition against him, which of course I was. What if I would have stayed with Jay? What if? My life would have been different today, I know that. Now nothing's guaranteed, and what I trip out on and what could have, should have, may have happened probably is far from how it could have played out, but you don't know. I will never know. But I'll always be thankful for the experience and marvel at Jay could see something in me that really nobody else saw. What if? A few years later, what if I hadn't overreacted about this man named Lou marched into my store and told me I had to get out? My dad was selling him the building. Instead of going and talking to my dad, I overreacted and just moved my store. Why would I have even done that? What if I would have just went and spoken with my dad? What if I would have stayed up there in north central Colorado Rocky Mountains instead of moving to Kansas? Now, I've had a wonderful life here in Kansas. I have. And looking at my old hometown now, I don't know if I'd like to be living there. But what if I would have stayed? What difference would I have made? What if? What if I hadn't looked back at the kids? They were in the bathtub. My oldest had been having a fever, and our next door neighbor, who was the lead EMT, told me to keep her cool with cool water, and so I had them in a cool bath. And they were playing, and they seemed fine. My oldest had had a fever. And I turned around and yelled at my wife, "Hey, will you watch the kids? I've got to go out and bring in some firewood." And I heard kids screaming, and I turned around. What if I hadn't turned around? I was walking. I was going to go out the door. And my oldest kid was having a febrile seizure, and she was under the water, seasoned, had swallowed her tongue, and she was blue, and she was shaking like nobody's business. What if I would have just not looked back? Robert Frost talks about the road less taken, and he had a choice between two roads. The choices we make define how our life journey goes. Most of them seem very insignificant, and yet looking back can make all the difference in the world. I think I'm glad I made the choices I did, although things like the trading post will always be a regret for me. What did old Sinatra say? Regrets, I've had a few, but then again, too few to mention. Well, I probably have too few to mention, but I have several. And sometimes I chew on them. Sometimes I ask God to forgive me. Sometimes I wonder why I chose that path at that moment in time instead of another. Count your blessings, count them one by one. Always be kind. It's good for your soul. Well, that's about it today. Just reflecting. Thank you for riding along. I'll be back next Wednesday. Peace out. Our unusual facts this week are about making decisions. Time limits increase likelihood of making a decision. You're better off making a split-second decision if you don't have to go to the bathroom. Emotions trump logic. Smaller groups make better choices. Okay, I've decided I'm leaving now. See you next week.